Hi, my name is Dawn, and I want to share an experience that I went through. I lost my vision, but when it came back, I was devastated. You might find it weird to hear someone who used to be blind complaining about seeing again. Well, if you hear me out, you'll understand why I say that. My story starts when I was 12 years old. My parents and I were driving out of town for my new baby cousin's christening. It was such an amazing day, and I had such a fun time seeing all my family, whom I didn't normally see often. Plus, my mom and dad bought me this totally expensive and gorgeous dress. It was all purple, with sequins and sparkles, and it was super soft. I was really in love with it. The day was great, and everyone was happy, but during the party after the christening, I went to find my mom and dad, and oh my God, they were standing outside and shouting at one another. It was so awkward and I felt so confused. Why were they fighting? I didn't want them to know I had seen them. So I ran away and hung around with my aunt and uncle for the rest of the day. When it was time to leave, my parents came and found me. They were both smiling, and it seemed like whatever was going on between them before was now over. I felt so relieved that everything was okay again. Then it happened. We were driving down the highway on our way home, and all of a sudden, bam! Another car slammed into the side of us. I don't really remember what happened very well. All I remember is that suddenly, my world went black. Apparently, another driver had merged into our lane without checking his mirrors and caused the accident. My parents and my doctor later told me I ended up in a coma for 2 weeks after the crash. Not that I remembered those weeks. When I finally did wake up, everything was still black. It was so strange. I kept blinking, but nothing appeared. It was like my eyes were staying closed even when they were wide open. I panicked and screamed. The doctors had to sedate me to get me to calm down. Eventually, after a lot of crying and confusion, I was ready to hear what was going on. The doctor told me that I had suffered a blow to my head, which had caused damage to my optic nerve, and meant I would have problems with my vision. Even then, they didn't expect me to totally lose my sight, but I did. My parents were devastated. I was devastated. It really, really sucked. Adjusting to my new world was hard. The world around me seemed the same in every way. I could still hear people talking. I could feel the bed I was sitting on. I could taste the jello I was given. But I saw none of it. All I saw was black. It was like the night sky was covering me all the time, except there were no stars. It was really scary at first. I had always been afraid of the dark as a child, and now darkness was my entire world. There was no nightlight I could turn on. When I left the house, I could feel the sunlight on my skin, but I couldn't see it anymore. I was sad for a really long time about it. I think it was worse for me than people who were born blind, because I knew what I was missing out on. At night, I would dream that I could see again. I would see all the beautiful flowers in the garden in their different colors. Red, blue, purple. I would see the bright blue sky. I'd be able to put on a new dress and admire it without having to ask my mom what color it was. My life changed in other ways, too. I was sent away from my school to somewhere else, somewhere that had teachers with special training and extra equipment to help me learn. I was taught this funny way of reading with my fingers. Mrs. Ebsen called it Braille, but really it was just bumps on a piece of plastic that meant different letters. The only upside to everything was that my parents finally let me get a dog. It was a specially trained golden retriever who could help me move around outside the house without my parents. Not that they would let me do that very often. I named him Riley, and I never went anywhere without him. I spent the next 4 years trying to make the most of my life. I'd never have to think about it before, but it turned out that being blind didn't totally hold me back much. Once I got the hang of Braille and began using Riley to get around outside, I started to get back to enjoying my life again. I made new friends at my new school, and life seemed kinda normal, at least as normal as it could be. Then everything changed again. My doctor told my parents they could try some experimental new surgery that might restore my eyesight. I couldn't believe it. After 4 years, I'd gotten used to not seeing, but that didn't mean I wouldn't take my sight back in a heartbeat. So I told my parents I wanted to try it, and they agreed. They wanted to do anything to help me. A few months later, I was back in the hospital and ready for surgery. It was super scary. I was worried the entire time that I hadn't done the right thing. What if something went wrong? What if I got my hopes up and it was all for nothing? My mind was racing with terrible thoughts, but I tried to ignore them. I went under, and then all of a sudden, I was waking up again. Instead of darkness, I was surrounded by blinding white light. At first, it was almost too much. I was so overwhelmed that I threw my hands over my eyes to try to block it out. It was giving me a headache. Everything was so bright now. My parents were worried about my reaction, but the doctor gave me an eye mask and said it was normal for things to be too much at first. So they took me home and sat me in the living room, where I tried to take the mask off. My parents left me alone so I could do it at my own pace, with no pressure. This time, everything wasn't quite so bright. My parents had drawn the curtains and left the lights off to give me time to adjust. All I could see were shadows at first in the dim light, but slowly, everything began to take shape. I could see the fireplace in my living room for the first time in years. I cried with happiness. I couldn't help it. The surgery had worked. I had never been so overjoyed in my entire life. But as I calmed down a little, I noticed something. The living room was practically empty. All of my mom's antique collectibles that she'd kept on the mantel above the fireplace were gone. The paintings on the wall were missing too. Feeling confused, I turned my head from left to right, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Then it hit me. They must have sold them. They must have sold things to pay for my surgery. I went into the kitchen to find them and asked them what had happened. But when I got there, I didn't think that they were my parents. I didn't recognize them at all. My mom was thin as a rake and my dad's eyes were black underneath from tiredness. Just how hard they had worked themselves. All for my sake? They told me that it wasn't just the surgery that was expensive. The tuition for my new school had cost them a lot, and so had my constant doctor's appointments. They had to buy books in Braille for me, and the seeing eye dog was pricey too. They had taken out a loan to cover my surgery, and would be working long hours and double shifts to pay for it. I wanted to cry again, but not from happiness this time, from guilt. I couldn't believe I had caused my parents so much pain. So I decided right then and there that I would make it up to them. I resolved to get my own part-time Saturday job as soon as my sight settled, and that's exactly what I did. The local grocery store interviewed me, and I was due for my first shift last Saturday. But when I turned up, they told me I wasn't going to be able to start. Apparently, my dad had called and told them he'd forbidden me from working there. I was more confused than ever before. Why would he do that when it meant I could help with our family's money problems? When I got home, I confronted my dad about it, and instead of being angry, he started crying. I couldn't believe it. I'd never seen my dad actually cry before. He confessed to me that on the day of the accident, he'd had one drink, a whiskey and a Coke, after his argument with my mom. He blamed himself for the accident all these years. He thought if he hadn't had that drink, he could have swerved out of the way to avoid the other driver, or done something to help me from getting hurt. I couldn't believe he'd had these feelings all these years. I hugged him close and told him that it wasn't his fault at all. It was an accident, and accidents happen. The other driver was deemed at fault by the police, and even if it was his fault, I'd forgive him because we're family. He calmed down a little after that, and finally agreed to let me work and help pay off the loan. It all worked out for the best, really. I enjoyed working in the grocery store and speaking to new people every day, and the little extra income meant my mom and dad could both take Sundays off. So Sunday became family day, and we spent it together every week to remind ourselves how lucky we are to have one another. Looking back at things now made me realize how lucky I am for having a family that supported me throughout that phase of my life. And to be honest, I can't say that I wish things took a different direction, because I owe my new self to this incident. I became a stronger person and stopped taking things for granted as I used to in the past. I also learned to appreciate the small things in life, as sometimes they make all the difference. I guess that sometimes we only realize the worth of what we have the moment we lose it. That's why my parents and I decided to start a foundation for blind people. Its aim is taking care of the needs of blind people and their parents. This way, we can ensure that the whole family will learn how to adapt to the situation together and go through the adjusting process as one unity. At the end of the day, a family should stick together no matter what, and work together to solve any problems, as we did. Thanks for listening to my story. What did you think of it? Hi, my name is Sandra, and I am 18. Unlike other 18-year-olds, I wasn't planning things for college or my future. Instead, I was struggling with the loss of 2 members of my family. You might wonder how that could be. Well, I'm gonna explain it all. It all began when my mom gave birth to my baby sister, Alexa. A new baby was not one of my parents' plans. They had her by mistake. Alexa came at the worst time possible because my parents were neither ready financially nor emotionally to raise another child. Mom, for example, was in between jobs, and she and Dad were barely managing to bring food on the table. As for me, I was 10 at the time, and I wasn't happy about having a baby sister so much younger than me. I'd grown up an only child, and I was the baby. I didn't want that to change, but then when Mom and Dad brought Alexa home, I fell in love with her. She was such a cutie, and so small. I ended up cradling her and playing with her way more than I thought I ever would. Then, disaster struck. Alexa became ill. At first, no one knew what was wrong. They thought maybe it was a bug or a cold, and she'd get over it after a little while, but she didn't. She had fever and refused to drink her milk. She was crying all the time, and it was an awful sound. Eventually, Mom took her to the hospital and found out what was wrong. It was meningitis. After that, she was kept in the hospital for a long time. They had to hook her up to a machine with fluid in it and gave her medicine. My mom was so worried, and everyone was saying that something bad was going to happen. She got super depressed. She couldn't leave her bed sometimes and had to call the hospital for updates instead of visiting. On top of everything, my dad, who was supposed to support us through this, left us suddenly. We later heard from one of his friends that he went to live with another woman and her kids. It was a shock to all of us, but we thought he just didn't know how to deal with Alexa's illness and needed time to think. We were sure he would come back, but he never did. After being treated at the hospital for a few weeks, Alexa was back to her normal self. The doctor said she was fine now and there weren't any side effects. Despite Alexa's recovery, Mom was still depressed. She became a zombie. Basically, she stopped doing anything. She stopped taking care of Alexa at all. I had to do everything. I was so young at the time, but I knew how to feed her, burp her, and change her diaper. It was horrible. I was always worried at school about whether my mom was going to look after my sister, but I knew how much my mom loved her, and I hoped one day she'd snap out of it. Then people started coming around the house, doctors and nurses and stuff. They were trying to help my mom to take care of me and Alexa, they said, but nothing seemed to work. It was like my mom had stopped fighting. When I left the house at 18, I wanted to take Alexa with me, but I couldn't. I was at college and working part-time. I couldn't take care of a child. The worst thing happened a few days after Alexa's 8th birthday. I went to visit my mom, and I couldn't find Alexa anywhere. My mom wasn't saying anything. I was so scared that she'd gone missing, but it turned out that she'd been removed from the house by Child Protective Services. I called the social worker who I'd grown up seeing, and she told me. She said that Alexa wasn't safe in Mom's care anymore, that she'd gone to a loving foster home until she could be adopted. I was devastated. My mom was devastated. If anything, it made her worse. She stopped going outside. She stopped feeding herself. She slept all the time. I didn't think it could get much worse, but I was wrong. One Saturday morning, I came to visit and collected all my mom's mail that was piling up on the doormat. I tried to get her to open them, but she wouldn't. I wanted to check for bills, so I went through her mail, and oh my God, I found thousands of dollars of debt on her credit card bill. I went upstairs to confront my mom about the debt, and that's when we saw it. My mom was curled up on the bed, cuddling a doll I'd never seen before. It was so lifelike, it was freaky. It looked exactly like a real-life little girl. When I moved closer, I realized that it wasn't just any girl. It looked exactly like Alexa. I just stood there in shock for a little while. I didn't know what to do, until I felt anger building inside me. Why would Mom do this? Why would she try to make a fake Alexa? It was awful. Alexa had been taken away because of her, and no plastic thing could ever replace her. I stormed over to her on the bed and ripped the doll out of her arms. "This isn't Alexa, Mom! Alexa is gone!" I yelled at her. That was when Mom went crazy. Her eyes looked frantically around until she spotted the doll in my hands. She tried to grab it back, but I wouldn't let go. "Give her back! She's mine! Mine!" My mom screamed, but I wouldn't. "She's gone, Mom. Alexa's gone and she's not coming back." I told her, but my mom was still reaching for the doll. "You can't replace her, Mom. She was one of a kind, not some plastic doll," I added, still holding the fake Alexa out of her reach. My mom stopped trying to pull her away then. Her hands dropped away, and her eyes went wide. She burst into tears and howled like she was in pain. It was as though she was grieving for my little sister. "I can't do this. I don't want to live anymore if I can't be with Alexa," my mom whispered in between sobs. I didn't understand what she meant at first.